Thanks for all joining. I know it's late. We're going to talk about what we're calling modern market research. I'm Matt Makovsky, and at Makovsky, my agency, which is an integrated communications firm, I've been particularly interested recently in kind of the strategic development of where we're going within social. And I think one of the main drivers that I've been really interested in is kind of this modern market research kind of tool. And we're going to describe more of what that is. We want this to be interactive. We've created a hashtag for it, MMResearch. We've been using PRSummit all week, so please feel free to get a lively conversation going. Also, if you fire questions at the hashtag MMResearch, Jared's going to be monitoring this in real time, and we'll try to get that in the Q&A. Just for some context, last year, Makovsky hosted a session on the relationship between the CMO and the CCO. And that integration really revolved around social as kind of a hot button issue, and I think we're all kind of aware that that exists. And I think the progression that's happening now is as social becomes kind of embedded and more of a broad focus area for the entire enterprise. Really, how do we bring everybody together? How do we fuel that? How do we use modern market research techniques to really make the enterprise more informed and create intelligent business decisions as a result of that? So I think the communications professionals, as we evolve our skill sets, can really be catalysts for this movement. And we're going to get into that a little bit more. So let me just go ahead and introduce our panelists. Directly to my left, we have Gay Hudson from Oracle. We're extremely happy to have her on the panel. She is the Vice President of Corporate Communications for the EMEA region, and she is also one of the distinguished members of the Influence 100 from the Holmes Report, so we are delighted to have her. To her left is Jason Gertzen, who's the Group Manager of Social Media and Reputation Management at Sprint. We've been working on a very collaborative project in this modern market research area, which we're going to take you through. And one thing I think that's great about Jason and relatively unique is that his social media division, and who's very progressive in analytics, sits in the communications department. And if we can start seeing more of that and more of kind of Jason's team, I think that would be great. And to his left is Jared Feldman, who's the CEO and founder of Mashwork. They are a social insights and intelligence agency. They are a very close strategic partner. We work together on several projects, including the Sprint one. So what are we going to cover? First of all, we're going to talk about how we got here. What are some of the trends in technology, consumer behavior, and across the enterprise that have kind of enabled this modern market research. We're going to define it for you, because I've now said it probably about 10 times, and you might be asking, what the hell is it? But we'll define it for you in very clear terms. And then also we'll hop into a case study again of Sprint, and we're going to highlight one of Oracle as well, get into a discussion, and then have a Q&A. So Gay, if you want to just take us through some of the trends that we're seeing that kind of have sparked this movement.
Matt, with pleasure. Warm welcome to everyone this afternoon. Having listened and heard to some of our leading luminaries over the last day and a half, to listen about data explosion, to hear about convergence, to hear about the importance of technology, to hear about social media. If you're sitting as a technology company with Oracle, it's a very nice discussion to have, because hopefully many of your systems are embedded on Oracle, and if they're not, you can bet your bottom dollar we'll be knocking on your door selling you some kit. That's not the point of why I'm here, though. It's about talking about some of the trends that we're seeing when we're talking to our customers. We have around 300,000 enterprise customers, and then an ecosystem of partners, around 37,000 in addition to that. So it's quite a large ecosystem, if you like. And in talking to those customers, many of these trends, if you like, you've heard already about globalization, about the fact that there are now 9 billion internet devices as of 2012. Now, that's quite a lot of devices, but by 2020, we're talking about 50 billion internet devices. Now, that gives us huge opportunity. It gives us also huge pain. And so what is that globalization going to mean to the businesses as they transform themselves and they get ever closer to their customers? The explosion of data, again, give you some facts. So 90% of data that we're collecting at the moment was created in the last 2 years. 90%. By 2020, that will be times 50. We don't know what that figure is. We just call it a hell of a lot of data because there is nothing out there that can actually explain to us how large that data is. Now, the challenge that therefore gives some of the technologists is if you're getting all this data, you've got to store all this data. You're probably now going to be spending 10% of your IT budget just on storing data. So now you're not spending your budget wisely. You're all trying to cut budgets anyway, and you're not spending that money now in innovation. You're just storing it. So that's one of the challenges that we're seeing, and you'll hear about compression and other things coming down the track. Everybody's talked about social. Social is connectivity. Social is our business. Social is how we're interacting. What does that mean? That means that governments are getting close to their citizens, that businesses are getting close to their customers, that our expectations are that much higher, and we've heard so much conversation around that. I don't even think I need to talk about it, Matt. Mobile ubiquity, this is very much your business. Don't let me tell you about it, but there's 6 million subscribers currently, and again, we're talking, so what is that? That's 87% of the population is now mobile. And their expectation of us is to be able to be responsive, to be more personal, to be there, to answer every question when it's necessary. We've heard a lot about this. In technology, the one area that we haven't talked about that is coming, obviously, is cloud. And cloud's important for us because it's going to change how some of industry and some of entrepreneurs are approaching technology as well. So the cloud didn't kind of exist 4 years ago. You've heard about it. You know a little bit about it. But even in the last sort of 18 months, it's developed to provide platform as a service, so that gives the technology to the developers. We've got infrastructure as a service, that gives technology to the IT, and then also you've got software as a service, and that's providing the end service to the business user. You will also hear about things called public clouds and private clouds. Governments are now going into the private cloud. So these are all hugely exciting technological changes and innovations, many of which I fervently believe the public relations and the corporate communications business is addressing. And I certainly know that an awful lot of my colleagues are addressing them and utilizing them. So if that gives you a macro, big picture.
It does, fantastic. And so Jared, how does this kind of boil down into what we're defining?
Those are staggering statistics. And it's interesting to think about how just a few years ago, the expectations have changed, right? So when you think about people on Twitter used to be surprised when a brand was on there and would say like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that Sprint was on Twitter. And now it's like if you don't answer within 30 seconds, you're like somehow a terrible brand, right? So when taking a step back, when you think about the principles of market research and the point of it, creating some sort of insight or value that you can then do something with, take action on, and how you've had to do it historically, how you've had to get a focus group together, some sort of statistically significant sample size, and there's been these contradicting forces where the bigger the sample size, the more money it takes, the less timely it is, probably it takes more time to put it together. And so you essentially are limited in that respect, and one of the most amazing things about what Gay is talking about is the modernization of what's possible. And so part of what we want to do today in exploring the different case studies and talking about some of the macro and micro trends that are happening is shed light on what's possible using social as a research tool. So we've defined modern market research in a few ways, but the first is about leveraging the mass communication. So there's an element of authenticity that takes place, a kind of a genuineness, when you're dealing with organic, unsolicited, unprompted conversations amongst friends and natural environments. And there's a ton to be learned there. It's just hard. But there's a lot of amazing insight you can create from that. The second thing has to do with scale. So in order to capture this information, we need the technology to have evolved to a point where we can essentially listen in on all of these conversations happening all over the world. And scale is, in a sense, how big, but also how small, because we're going to learn today that it's not always as much conversation as possible that's important, but where it's happening, hyperlocal. And the third thing is about translation, is how do you take what all of this amazing data that we found amongst friends, organic conversation, and how do you do something with it? And the art of taking a data point and turning it into information and intelligence and then action is what also defines modern market research.
Thank you, Jared. So if we've defined it, I kind of think we have to understand it in the context, again, in the scale of what it is. So if we've been used to traditional focus groups, what are we asking of what we're calling and what is the world's largest modern focus group? And it's really all about asking the right questions. So, it's about meeting brand objectives by asking the right questions. So there's a diversity across different business units and business problems you can solve by the questions you're asking. So, for communications professionals, a traditional one will be crisis management, right? How bad is the crisis? We can use social tools to get our arms around that conversation. I believe in the most recent statistics, 53% of large enterprise organizations are now using social listening as a means to combat and preempt crisis situations. Beyond that, there could be product development stuff, right? And so this is where the communications group can help inform broader parts of the organization. If I'm Nike, I might want to understand how consumers feel about the new LeBron James South Beach sneaker that came out. I mean, I have them, so my guess is that they're probably reacting pretty well to it, but there might be nuance in the conversation they can learn about how they're developing their products. If I'm Sprint, or if I'm an airline, or if I'm somebody else, and I have high volume of customer care issues to deal with, I might want to know and ask the question, how accurately, how quickly, how well is my customer care team responding to some of the issues we're dealing with? So just a quick example that I found in real time as this conference is going on that I think really begs for us to take a closer look at. So this map that you're looking at actually has to do with a very tragic event that's going on in the Philippines, as we all know, and the devastation that's happened through the typhoon. But this is the power of what you can do with this kind of social data, right? And so part of the recovery effort right now that's going on in the Philippines is actually taking an algorithm and mapping it around social conversation to be able to diagnose where to deploy some of the rescue resources that are necessary. And so they basically are deciphering tweets, Facebook posts, Instagram videos, and they're grouping them in various areas. So whether it's flood zones, or whether it's areas that need more medical supplies or more food supplies, or there's been large death tolls, they're basically qualifying the data and they're deploying resources based on it. And so this is a very kind of up-to-date example and very important way people are grappling with it. So what's the formula for success, Jared? What does it look like?
So deconstructing modern market research, we're focusing on 4 key pillars as to how to create something like this. We're going to run through each, and then we want to figure out how they apply to both on the brand and technology side. So first, we talk about participation. So the ability for executives to, across discipline, cross-functionality, different departments come together and first be aware and understand and believe that there's value to be created using social as a research tool, but really get brand buy-in. This is from internally at the enterprise, getting people to work together to be able to accomplish something singular. And then second, we talked about technology and the need to be able to, the right type of technology to answer the right types of questions. And there's now no shortage of options, and so we can talk through a little bit what those look like. And the third, we mentioned translation, having people internally or working with partners that understand this natively and that can help you do something with the information, which is our final point, which is all of this is nothing, means nothing if you can't do anything about it. I think the reason, just to tie it back to your example, that's so powerful is they had 10,000 additional data points. I think it was like 10,000 tweets in a matter of 12 hours that they collected that they were able to qualify as important, containing helpful information, and were able to, even with UN standards, know exactly where to allocate resources. That's like unbelievable. And so it kind of opens up a whole new world of things that can be accomplished. And so bringing it back to how business gets done and brands in the agency world, I kind of want to pose our first question. So, Jason, you're at Sprint, and what I would have to imagine is over the last couple of years, you've seen a lot of changes internally, kind of the evolution of maybe the viewpoint. And so my first question is about how have you seen how you think about social media as a research tool evolve over the last few years?
Well, I find these trends and these statistics and these concepts to be fascinating, and I'm always trying to stay up on them. But I also bring the perspective of someone on a little bit further downstream who has to do something with that information. And so at Sprint, we've definitely seen social evolve and grow up over the years. It started as sort of an organic initiative by a number of different departments. So marketing started doing some things, the PR department started doing some things, but we've really become much more focused and had a lot more players. And so we definitely think about sort of 3 areas that we try and focus on in terms of what we're doing with our social outreach initiatives. And one is to sell phones and acquire customers. That tends to be led mostly by the digital marketing teams. We also have a lot of customer care actions on social. We've really seen that group really grow and expand. And then in my area, it's more about the managing and monitoring our corporate reputation. And so the things that we're really looking for in terms of social data are for those early alerts when we have something that indicates what customers might feel about our brand, or when there's an issue that we need to respond. And that will give us the data to be able to know what we should do.
Awesome. Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so when you think about kind of the broad-reaching nature of what Jason has to kind of use social, both listening and kind of activation to deal with, touching many parts of the organization. So I would pose to you, Gay, from a technology standpoint, Oracle has invested a tremendous amount of money in big data, and specifically in your social cloud offering. What kind of enterprise trends were you seeing where this kind of convergence or integration needed to happen? And also kind of, how did you figure out, was your customer telling you what certain pain points were areas to focus on?
He's very good because he knows what I want to say. So he's leading is lovely. We listen to our customers, so we have 300,000 enterprise customers, and fundamentally, they were telling us what they were looking for was a holistic and integrated social engagement model, if you like. And what you're calling modern market research, we're probably calling social relationship management. So look out for something called SRM. I mean, technology companies have to have yet another anecdote. So you've seen HCM, CRM, and now expect SRM. But it's that aside, what we're trying to do is bring that loop together from the analysis to the listening, to the customizing, to the analysis, to the responsiveness, and ultimately to the engagement and the nurture. And that is the cycle, if you like, of this enterprise. Now, within technology, we have some great technologies, but there are also some fantastic pinpoint solutions out there that I could recommend to you. So if you're looking for sort of a sales automation, you can go to several organizations to do that. Because we're dealing from an enterprise side, we tend to find that our customers are looking for everything to be able to integrate it. So they want the customer relationship management, they want the human capital management tools, and they need the social engagement listening tools, etc. So we have also gone through the acquisition route as well, and we've acquired the maybe software that you use yourselves, Eloqua, which is an excellent sales automation system, Vitru, which is a content publishing software, and RightNote, just to mention 3, because you always remember everything in 3s, which is a CRM tool. So that's where we're going, customer-driven, trying to respond to that customer. Internally, it was interesting also just thinking what you just said there, Jason, about how we use it internally. Absolutely, PR for reputation, marketing for sort of the demand generation piece, customer support for the responsive piece, and also an awful lot more for talent development. The outreach of using social for talent as well as the third pillar that we would use.
Yeah, that's a very hot area, and also as organizations try to bring more millennials into the workforce and figure out how to deal with these guys, socials it can often be the outreach mechanism to do that. Should we throw a question to the audience?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm curious, just kind of show of hands, I guess. So we have a lot of agencies here, some brands too, I think, but who here has access to one of these monitoring tools, a way in which to get information from social media? Who has access to one? Okay. Okay, awesome. And those of you that do have access to it, how often are you using it? Are you leveraging on is it kind of a luxurious thing, or is it kind of integrated, into what you're trying to accomplish on a regular basis? How often do you use it? All the time. it's always on. It's something that you always need kind of access to. Awesome. Awesome. Cool. Yeah.
Great. Well, so we talked about what are some of the questions to ask of this kind of the world's largest modern focus group, but kind of turning our attention to the sprint kind of area that we were delving into. Jason came to us with some specific questions that he had about getting very deep on a strategic growth part of their business, which was their 4G LTE network. And so if we take a step forward, basically let's put this case study into action. So this is going to be modern market research applied into action. And so Jason, if you want to set the scenes for how we got together and what the stakes were.
Sure. No, so as a lot of this data has been coming into the organization, I think the marketing teams, obviously they've been able to really analyze how effective their outreach has been in social media. So as they're putting out offers, as they're doing paid promotions, I think their sophistication in the analysis is really risen. It's been a newer area in the corporate communications realm of really trying to sift through this kind of information and see how it's meaningful to guide the outreach that we have been doing and see what are the opportunities for us to do it a little bit differently and have some greater impact. And so one of the things that we have been challenged with is, in the US, it's obviously a very fiercely competitive environment in the wireless industry, and we've got a bit of an arms race in terms of building out these new generation networks. And one of the things that Sprint, is we're the number 3 player in the market. It's really been a challenge in terms of managing consumer perception. So some of our rivals have been ahead of the curve in terms of where we are, in terms of building out networks. And so from a communications perspective, what we've been trying to do is let's at least get credit for the progress that we're making and address those consumer perceptions. And so I think this kind of data has been tremendously meaningful to us to really know sort of where we stand, both in terms of what consumers are saying and thinking about their experience with our company, what our competitors are doing, and then what are the opportunities for us to communicate a little bit differently so people are aware of the progress we're making and that we can bring information back to the business to let them know where there are particular pockets of concern.
Great, and it was a very collaborative effort to kind of come up with the brief for what exactly we wanted to solve for. But we tried to kind of bring a fresh third-party perspective and a new set of eyes to stuff that you have been seeing for a while, and then kind of go deep to see kind of what we could uncover. So the overall mission of the strategic project was essentially using social intelligence to increase the impact of communications about the progress that Sprint was making in the 4G LTE area. In order to kind of do that, we really need to understand the telecom conversations landscape in totality and really kind of break that down into certain key drivers, both from a brand competitive standpoint and what was happening within this network piece. And ultimately, what we wanted to come out with was an action plan and a roadmap. What are some of the recommendations we can make from some of the insights we were deriving that could really start to make a difference and kind of change this consumer perception? So just to kind of give you a quick overview of how we actually went about doing this and how we scoped out the assignment, it kind of broke down into 2 different reports. The first one was establishing the baseline. So you can't really do modern market research unless you kind of know where you stand. And so we had to figure out exactly where the telecom conversation was and Sprint within it. So what we did was take a look at over 2.2 million pieces of conversation and go back a 6-month period to really get that kind of perspective. And then, as I mentioned, understand the telecom space, but we really needed to understand within Sprint conversation, what were the drivers? What did consumers care about? What were the pain points? And then within that, people were going to be talking about the network. And some people were going to be talking about the network from a general standpoint, and some of the people were going to be talking about or responding to the specific communications that was coming from the corporate communications group. And so we needed to understand what that was. And ultimately, we wanted to understand what was the local impact, because this kind of exercise and as Sprint rolls out their 4G LTE network, it really affects the local market. So if I'm a consumer, I care about how my service is in Miami, for example. And so we wanted to understand what was the conversation using tools, geo-targeting on a local level to get underneath that.
So this is certainly an exercise in finding the signal through the noise sort of thing. And as Matt mentioned, there's an extraordinary amount of conversation relevant. But what we cared about specifically were the drivers of emotion. So what we focused on is looking for instances of conversation that were about the network by itself, and then also looking at the the 4G LTE announcements specifically, as well as the brands and the competitors. And I think what you're seeing here is an example of focusing just on the emotional element and the positive and negative sentiment being expressed, but specifically organized and categorized by and put it into the context of how the brand typically thinks about these things and makes decisions, because this is all about translating the information to something that can be helpful. And so we looked at the percent of conversation that was about the messaging, the actual messaging that the corporate communications team was putting out, actually about the network. And then we also did this not only for Sprint, but for the entire landscape, because it's important to understand that when you see a number, no matter how big or small, it's not necessarily good or bad. And so part of what we focused on is really painting a pristine picture of what was happening in the space, and then what were the specific areas of how we could improve.
And I think this is interesting because some of the pain points we deal with, and Jared threw the question out of how many of us in the audience use individual tools. None of them are great at everything, right? And sentiment is a key area that's been very difficult to kind of crack. So there is this technology and human element at play here that really starts to get to it. So when we do those kind of breakdowns, we have to kind of understand, well, what does negative conversation mean versus positive, and not just trust that some tool will tell us, but that we kind of understand it and then kind of we can leverage it at scale.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that became very apparent about what would be important about how Sprint thinks about rolling these things out is the local markets, and how to actually, what's the right cadence to use? Do you tease an announcement in a particular market? Do you release all of them at once if you're ready, or do you do it over a longer period of time? And this is actually a snapshot of the Miami market. And what we learned is up top, you're seeing the big spike when people are very, very happy when Sprint announces the network is coming to your area, which is exciting. And then what we look at is the actual deceleration and how quickly it goes back from that to normal levels. And what we learned in these particular markets, in Miami actually specifically, is if you look at the chart below, you're actually seeing an extended period of positive conversation over the course of much longer than what's typical. And the only way we know what's typical is to look at these types of things in different markets and across competitors. And actually the extension of this is an index we actually created. But what's interesting here is we learned, okay, so this is a friendly market, and there's things you can do there. And I don't know if you want to talk maybe about some of that insight there.
So we've got an ongoing active monitoring and measurement program. So I've got members of my team that we're all looking for any signs that an issue is popping up in social media that we'll need to manage. We also have an ongoing measurement program where we're trying to see what are the trends over a given period of time, whether it's a week or a couple weeks or on a monthly basis. Where we really found a tremendous amount of value is on a project like this is to work with some partners who could invest heightened resources to answer a very specific question, and it's how are we doing in terms of getting a message across in a specific market. That's one of the things that we've been challenged with some of the social media monitoring tools, is to really be able to drill down and know what that conversation is in a given area, and then what are the drivers of that conversation. So I think the Miami example is one that you mentioned, where I thought that was pretty interesting in terms of some of the insights that we got. Social media is not just about the conversation that only goes on Twitter and Facebook and the other social sites. There's very much a connection with what's going on in terms of traditional media coverage or other buzz that is contributing to what that conversation looks like in social. And so one of the things that you were able to identify, and you also brought sort of an outsider's perspective and could just analyze the data in an objective way. And when you saw that there was some momentum in a market like Miami, we were able to track back and see what were some of the activities that we had done to stimulate that and to build on that. And as it turned out, I mean, I think what this really showed us is how important it is it's communicating not just through social media, but to layer that on with some traditional PR activities. You know, we had some of our PR teams that focused on reaching out to some influencers in the market. They did some tours of some cell sites and just did a lot of other outreach to try and get the word out. And it all worked hand in glove, and we had the results that showed for that. And so it just affirmed to some of my colleagues who are managing those aspects of it how important it is and how far-reaching the impact could be from those types of events and sort of the added lift they can get through social.
Yeah, that's tremendously interesting. I mean, social is never going to supplement the diversity of strategies and tactics that you want to use. And now we just kind of had a heartbeat or a monitor on what's the reaction on social and kind of get the consumer feedback.
One thing I find quite interesting on that as well is the human element behind the analysis, because we have all these fantastic states. You know, the ball's getting redder or greener, it's smaller, it's larger, and all this wonderful analysis. And there's a story I tell about ourselves, in fact, where we were talking very much about the economic downturn in Europe, because I wear a European hat, and how technology can help that. And the spokesperson was talking about, well, there's a crisis in Europe, we need to understand it, we need to reflect on it. Now, that word crisis, of course, was one of our search engine words. Whoa, we went off the Richter scale. Everyone said, my goodness, they're in crisis, Oracle's meltdown, what's going on? And of course, it was just that one single reference to that one single word that created a blip like that. So you do need that human watching, if you like, for those occasional twists that can just catch you out.
100%, thanks for that. And we're going to kind of just move through this, but to understand how we got from one report to the other, if the first one was about understanding a baseline and going into specific markets, we wanted to deepen our understanding of the second one. So now we went from June announcements to a July period where we wanted to unpack the competition and basically understand what was going on, and if we had more intelligence there, what do we do about it? We wanted to identify these friendly markets, and that was the reference again to Miami. Miami was actually announced in June, but what we did was listen to the Miami conversation from June all the way through July to kind of get a baseline, and that was our indication of saying, okay, now we've seen what happens over a month. We know it's not the norm to kind of have sustained positive conversation. What's really going on there? Is this a friendly market, and what do we do about it? We isolated again in the second report priority markets for Sprint that they had called out, and we saw interesting things in different areas. Right, if you tease an announcement, you'll get a spike and a positive spike, but will that compromise the actual announcement that you're making? If you use influencers in a certain way, will that help? And so those were kind of some of the things we're looking at, and we developed this announcement success index, which basically gave us a relative understanding across the competition. We'll tell you a bit more about that.
Yeah, and so this is just a screenshot of some of the different kind of verbatims that people were sharing, and it was interesting to see kind of the nuance and the variability of how we express ourselves, especially just about a network announcement like this. So just kind of generic sharing of the information, but also like people saying, "Thank the network gods, it's finally here." That sort of excitement is fantastic to amplify. You have people that are curious, that say, "I heard about it. I'm acknowledging that I'm aware of this announcement. I'm wondering what the effects are," and people also just kind of welcoming Sprint to Miami. And so that sort of spectrum, capturing the different ways in which people are talking about it, and putting it into the context of some sort of analysis that's helpful in terms of how you can move forward with it.
And so context, again, we keep coming back to, but this was the announcement success index that we created, and really what we tried to do here was normalize the data across the competition. And so, everybody is making announcements in different cities that have different populations. How do we understand exactly, if we know this is a local exercise, what is the actual engagement level and the buzz on the local level, and how do we understand the relativity of that? And so we took the top two engagement or volume of conversation announcements from each of the players and basically looked into it and normalized the population down and said who was able to create kind of an engagement metric within that local population. And we learned a lot from what we're able to do and kind of inform in this local exercise, that it wasn't so much about the national, but it was about the local.
So, I mean, this is part of what we talked about in the beginning was we needed to be able to create insight and action from it. And so we essentially started with 2.2 million conversations, and we're able to turn it into some pretty interesting insights. So we'll run through some of these, but we learned about, the value formula goes well beyond just the network improvements, the types of things that people care about and what they prefer and what they don't. We pinpointed the fact that conversation spikes are short-lived, but we looked for kind of blips in that where we could see where conversation was extended and positive conversation specifically. And we talked about the local market idea and that there's opportunities there if we can figure out, okay, something interesting is happening here. What did we do differently? Or what are the things that we can take advantage of or then mimic in other places? And the competitive intelligence component is a huge piece, I think. I think showing that something is, X% negative without any idea of what everyone else is doing is just not useful. And so we worked really hard to make sure we could figure out within the different regions what worked and what didn't for everybody. And then kind of coming back to this idea of scale, and we took 2.2 million conversations and mapped them to the particular places in which they came from. And we were able to learn actually that the more local, the better, right? And it's essentially an insight that deserved kind of data validation behind it, and I think we were able to do some cool things with that.
And so, again, we stress actionable insights, and so Jason, gave us the challenge to, okay, well, what do we do about it? It's great, you can give us the insight and we get our heads around it, but what do we do about it? So we understood that basically there was a network conversation going on, and if we think about other businesses, it's a similar effect. But that's not the only thing consumers care about. And so we were noticing that within network announcements from both Sprint and the competition, if you infuse it with other things customers care about, other value drivers like device upgrades, like new phones coming out, like different promotions and/or events, that can be very powerful. There's, like we mentioned, there's a spike that traditionally happens when you make an announcement, but on either end of that spike, we found that you can either pull the conversation forward by teasing an announcement, or seeing like what happened in LA organically. They figured that 4G was there, and they picked up on the story, and it caused a lot of buzz before the announcement. Or on the back end, really what the job became was how do we extend the spike into a more prolonged period, and getting localized outreach and content was part of that. Embracing the friendly market thing like Miami. When we have a friendly market, what do we do about it? Is this an opportunity for us to amplify it? Can we help to kind of bite into the larger piece of the Sprint conversation with this positive network piece that we care a lot about? Sprint does a lot, and Jason can attest to what they do, both from a Sprint care perspective and both from a internal employee engagement perspective. So how do we deploy Sprint care resources when we're spotting issues and/or trends in markets, when we have spikes and we have positive, and we have spikes and we have negative? How do we take care of that, and how do we deploy the internal kind of Sprint social ninjas to be our advocates in that area? And then again, we kind of noticed that if you break the announcements down and do it more frequently to fewer markets and speak more directly to those markets, that you'll have a higher impact.
If I could just add on a couple points there. I mean, there are a lot of things that we learn from this project, and that I'm going to apply to future projects, and that might be meaningful to others as you're thinking about how to utilize these tools. And I'll just focus on a couple. And so one is the sort of the partnerships we have within our organization and how important that is. I think you guys saw in the data how meaningful it was when we had our social care teams that would interact with customers and sort of that engagement. And what we were able to do is use this report, and we have our customer care agents. We have dozens of care agents who are assigned exclusively to interact with customers on social sites, primarily Twitter and Facebook, and then our own online communities. And one of the things that this showed is how important it is that they engage right away when these announcements are made and people start interacting with us. And so we were able to put them on alert as announcements were made and make sure that what we call our at Sprint Care social care team would be engaged. We've also got a very active employee advocacy program. We've had more than 3,000 employees come through various workshops to participate as employee advocates in social media, and we call it the social media ninjas. And this was another point that just emphasized how important it was to give them information so employee advocates would be prepared to engage. And then the last thing I'll touch on just really quickly is, it wasn't just about the social media monitoring technology or the data and the insights itself. One of the things that really stood out to me is that we were talking to some of my colleagues in corporate communications, is we're all coming at this with sort of different levels of knowledge. And so there were some colleagues that weren't as familiar with what the monitoring data looked like, and they weren't as immersed in it. And so we had to bring them along on a journey. And while we were ready to dive deep into, here's what the information is showing us, here's what the action it recommends, we recognized that some of the people that actually had to carry out those actions, they needed to come along with us. And we almost had to start at the beginning and think about how we were going to present the findings and present what we looked for. And so I think that's an area where I think we did a good job here, but that's an area I'm going to focus increasingly on in the future.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things we found was we talked about in the beginning of the session, can this stuff have broader enterprise implications across different business units? And so part of the mental work we're doing now is trying to figure out how do you apply this 4G LTE kind of deep dive framework we did to other parts of the business and solve different briefs. And so when you notice there's a price value kind of conversation going on with consumers, what's actually driving customer acquisition? How are they responding to our sponsorships? How are they responding to our internal kind of social ninja team? All that stuff is possible. So at this point, I kind of want to turn it to Gay to give a very poignant case study of how they were using data in a very interesting way to power the Oracle America's Cup.
Okay. Just one second, if I can. It was taking on board something that Paul said this morning around storytelling and how PR tends to do the facts and advertising tends to do the anecdotes, and the story is the most important thing. And hopefully this 30 seconds excites you into the story that I'm about to tell you. Thank you. If you just roll the video.
Roll the video, thanks.
So it's Thursday the 19th of September, and I take a flight into San Francisco from London, and I arrive, as those flights do, at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And that boat was on the water, literally as I came in. And as I came the other side of customs, we heard that we had lost yet another round against Team New Zealand, sponsored by Emirates, and we were 8-1 behind, and you only needed 9 to win. Which, from a social perspective, we were off the Richter scale again with it's impossible, can't be done, never in the history of sport is it achievable, and we were monitoring that obviously all the time and using our advocates, our ninjas, to try to explain that actually you never give up. And I think there were 3 lessons to this, and this comes back to the human piece being so important around the technology as well. So we've probably, as had Team New Zealand, got some of the world's most highly skilled yachtsmen on board those 2 boats. They're gold medalists in their own right. They've been working at this for 18 months to try to bring that single cup, which is a claret jug, back to their country, or respectively for Oracle to retain it in the US. And the team never gave up. They always believed that there was an opportunity in everything that you do. And by tweaking small things through technology, they were able to demonstrate that. So on that boat, there are over 300 sensors that are taking information, everything from the wind to the current change, to the shift in the water, the hot and the cold that we talked about yesterday. And those 300 sensors are feeding a server, which is actually on a chase boat. And those 4 analytical experts and technicians are then feeding the information back to the crew members, either on their watch or on their glasses, so that if you're the trimmer, you know what you're going to need to do to just shape that change. And so the use of that technology really helped to bring the America's Cup to retain it in the States than it did actually for us to give it back to Team New Zealand. But from a social perspective, we were dealing with, as I say, from the impossible to Oracle, you've got egg on your face, to actually is impossible possible, to is a sport turnaround ever possible like this, to our ultimate victory. So we saw every emotion, thinking about what you were talking about, emotion on social, and obviously used the crew members and everything else to engage with our 133,000 employees, of which only a few thousand could be there. So we used social to engage them, to feel that they were part of it, obviously, to our 37,000 partners who were actively engaged in it, and obviously to our 300,000+ customers. So it's a bigger picture, it's a more visual story, but it's what our business is about, and it's about bringing data to people that you can make wonderful decisions and how you really can shape change, whether you're on the water, whether you're in retail, whether you're in healthcare, whether you're in telcos. It makes such a difference to where it is, and you can tell I'm very excited by it.
Yeah, it was a very powerful story, and I think what ties it all together really is that there was data in both instances, right? But your crew members and the sprint team would not have been able to do anything with the data unless there was kind of informed decision making behind it. So we have just a few minutes. I want to toss it to the audience. I know we're late in the day and probably need coffee and or have flights to catch, but anybody have any questions? Okay, we have time for one.
Great, man.
That's Richard.
Hi, I heard a lot over the last 3 days about what social can do for organisations' understanding of their audiences and campaigns and things like that. What can social not do?
Great question.
That's probably one of my favorite questions I've gotten. So what can social not do? So when we talk about modernization of market research, we certainly don't mean to imply that it replaces market research. And to the point you're implying, certainly there are things that you can get by asking someone something that they necessarily wouldn't share kind of publicly amongst friends. And so in that way it becomes complementary. And then there's also the idea of, it's a very global audience here, so a lot of the questions that we get is around kind of the international nature of social and how people, how these behaviors extend beyond America, for example. And what's true is that there are pockets of the world that are extraordinarily participating in the media and sharing their opinions and emotions and such, but there are other places where it's still kind of lagging. And so in those regions, we talked about how the social mapping of the Philippines disaster is like an amazing story of how we can help with crisis, a true crisis like that. But that company was actually started a couple years earlier, and I forget which country it was in, but there wasn't enough social conversation for it to be meaningful, and so it didn't work at first. And so everything needs to be taken with a grain of salt. And I guess the last point I'll make is, when I first started Mashwork a couple of years ago, there was a lot of worry of sample bias, of, you're only going to get the very, very vocal negative people or positive people. And what's true and what's happened is that as the fastest growing demographic on Twitter is over 50, and the average gamer on Facebook is a 42-year-old housewife, there's the leveling out of who's participating, which demographics are a part of these conversations, and a very, very rich sample set. But it's all taken with a grain of salt.
All right.
Thanks
so
very
much.
Thank you.